Hello again, everybody. This is Brian, and I'm back here with lesson number 3. This is an additional Fusion 360 tutorial. This time we're really focused in on maybe efficiency is a great way to talk about it. Trying to do the least amount of work possible and still achieve a result. So this accomplishes two things by being efficient. One, it makes us faster at drawing, and number two, it makes it easier to modify drawings moving forward because there's fewer things that we have to actually update if we have new dimensions that we need to add. So anyway, the part we're looking at is this one. It's just a kind of design for a bracket that maybe gets bolted down and has a pin running through these holes. So I'm going to show you how to draw this, hopefully in a fairly efficient way. One thing while we're talking about efficiency, I do want to point out that there is no right way to draw things in a drafting program. People might approach drawing this in multiple different ways. They might do holes before they do something else. They may mirror in a completely different way. So I do want to point that out, that I am showing you one way of drawing something. It is not necessarily the only way to do that. So we're going to step back through the timeline feature here, and you can kind of see what the my process for building this was, and then we'll build it together throughout the tutorial. So I'm going to rewind my timeline here, start with a sketch, which is this base plate geometry, and then there's another sketch which adds this side geometry that obviously gets extruded out a thickness. There's a fillet added here to the two corners to soften that up, and another fillet added to these four corners. Again, maybe these could be done at the end. They don't have to be done right now. Although the next step is to add this hole here, and so that hole is actually based off of the center point for the fillet that came before that. So those two things, that step actually is pretty critical there. There is another sketch for another hole that goes all the way through inside of that. And then I'm introducing a new plane here. If I hover over that, you'll see what that plane looks like. And then that allows me to mirror about that plane. So I'm only drawing one hole to create the two holes. And then I'm creating yet another plane. And if we hover over that, you'll see where that plane is. And that allows me to mirror this whole geometry to the other side. Finally, we add one more fillet kind of on these internal corners here, and I throw in this lesson number 3 tag on the bottom. I'm showing you that now because in the future assignments, I want you to be able to drop your name right on your part to make it easier to distinguish whose piece is whose. So anyway, I'm showing you how to do that in this tutorial. So there is a PDF of the geometry available on course site. This is roughly what it looks like. I did the drawing here. I will cover this in this session, how to do drawings, because it can be really helpful. But you can grab the dimensions that you need off of this drawing that is right here. So again, here's my top view, front view, side view, and we have this lovely orthographic. All right, so let's go ahead and open a new tab here in Fusion, and we will get started. So step 1, we open Fusion, make sure that our document settings, we are in millimeters, because that's what all of the numeric values are for this. So just double checking that. And like always, I am going to start by creating a sketch. So click Create Sketch. I'm going to start with that base plate, which is sitting on the ground. So I'm going to choose my top view or my top plane as the plane that I'm drawing on. Simple rectangle. So I start with a corner rectangle, start on the origin point. I'm not using the origin for anything dramatic in this exercise, so I can go ahead and start on the origin. In hindsight, it may have actually been smart to start with a corner rectangle, and then I wouldn't have needed to generate those new planes. But I think that's actually an important step here in this tutorial, is to show you how to create planes using the mid-plane tool. So I am going to start right here in that corner. Okay, so we do that. We're going to drop in some dimensions now. Again, you notice when I drew that I didn't even really pay attention to how big they were. This side is 100 millimeters, and the bottom part is 200 millimeters. Put in those numeric values. Quick tip here, you can see like my object that I've just drawn is behind my sketch palette. It's a little annoying. I could like click my scroll wheel and move that object back, or if you use that zoom to fit button right here, it'll draw everything in, and you can zoom out. It kind of centers it in your drawing window. So that's a good quick way to do that. Okay, so that's it. We can see everything's black, it's fully defined. I'm going to go ahead and finish that sketch, and then we'll go ahead and give this a little thickness. I'm going to extrude this up 10 millimeters and click OK. All right, so we have this 10 millimeter plate. Again, I hit the home button here. That recenters it. Make sure that we're seeing that orthographic projection. All right, the next thing I want to deal with is if I click over here to the finished geometry, here we go. I want to deal with this face here. So I'm actually going to draw this side sketch next. And so that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to click back over, and we are going to go to create a sketch, because that's what we do. And I'm going to choose this edge as the face I'm going to draw on. So again, I'm not selecting an existing plane, although I could actually draw on this plane if I wanted to, but it's easier to use existing geometry. So I'm going to select that face. And so we're going to learn a new tool here. We're going to use a tangent arc inside the line command to create this kind of side geometry. So we're going to invoke the line command, and I'm going to hover over here until I see that blue X. And there is, there's a space between the edge of this and the start of this. If we go back to that geometry, it's actually 50 millimeters. So I'm going to start this over away from that edge. Once I see that blue X, I'm going to click and let go, and I'm going to start to pull away. Again, I'm not too worried about the height here. I'm just trying to capture the rough geometry, so I'm not really paying attention to height. I'm going to click to end that line, right? And you'll see if I start to pull away, the line command is still active, so I could go ahead and draw another line. But what I want you to do is stay on top of that point, and this time I want you to click and hold and start to pull up and over. Now, it's important to pull up and over because that's going to start to show how you want that arc to progress. So I'm going to pull up and over till I start to see that arc exist. Let go of my mouse when I have it where I want it, and that's going to position the end of that arc. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that line down until I see that blue X, again touching the top surface of where I started. All right, so I do that. I'm going to hit escape to get out of my line command, and I want to show you that we've added a relation because I used that tangent arc command. By clicking and holding, it starts to create that arc that's tangent to that first line. You'll notice here that this doesn't have that smooth tangency. And so here, I'm going to show you how to add an additional constraint to create a tangency there. Because if we look at, I guess we can look at the drawing here. If I zoom in here a little bit on the drawing, you'll see that it's completely smooth, this progression from the arc into the line, right? And that's what we call a tangency. So I'm going to go back here. What I want to do is I want to tell Fusion that I want this to be a smooth transition, and I need to do that through tangency. So to do that, I'm going to click the two things I want to create the constraint against, between. So I click the arc, I'm going to hold down the shift button, click the line. So again, shift is paramount because that allows me to select multiple things. And then up here in constraint, you will see that a lot of these have already grayed themselves out. That means that Fusion says, well, I can't make those two things horizontal, and I can't make them coincident, but I can create a tangency. So you'll see that that is still active. I simply click that tangent, and you'll see that it adds that tangent constraint, and that smooths out that transition between those two. All right, now we need to add a few dimensions in here to further constrain the drawing. So my first dimension, I'm going to go to my dimension tool, again type D, or go to create and click sketch dimension. I'm going to create a dimension from this point to this line. So I click the two things I want to create that dimension between, and that is going to be 50 millimeters. Okay. I have a radius here. So I'm going to click on this guy and add a radius of 20. And I have an angle measurement between this line and this line. So I'm going to click here, and that wants to be 45 degrees. All right, the other thing I have is I have a height from this point of the arc, the center point of the arc, to the base plate. And that wants to be 60 millimeters. So I'm going to click the base plate line here, click the center point here, and that is going to be 60. And hopefully if we do that, yep, everything becomes fully defined. The last thing I want to do to this sketch is I want to put a hole in the middle of this plate. Now I could do that as a separate sketch. I really think it's part of the geometry of this side. So I'm going to go ahead and add a circle here, click the center point, pull away, and we'll add a dimension to that. And that has a diameter of 20. So we have a radius of 20 here, a diameter of 20 there, and that is fully defined because it's coincident. And you'll see because I clicked on the center point of that circle or that arc here, it's created that coincident relationship between those two. All right, so everything's fully black. We can go ahead and finish the sketch. And we can go ahead and extrude this thing. So I click on extrude. I'm going to click this inside surface. I want to make sure I'm not clicking the center of this circle. I'm going to click this surface, and the thickness of this is 10 millimeters. I pulled that arrow over. It moves it in the negative direction. It is in fact 10, so I'm good to go there. And I'm going to click OK. All right, next step is to create, let's go back to how I did it originally. I'm going to go here, let's go back in our timeline. So we have this, we now have this, and the next step is to add those two fillets here on these two corners, followed by the fillets here. Those all have a radius. If we look here, those have a radius of 20, and that has a radius of 20 up here in that top corner. So radius of 20 is pretty consistent all the way around. I checked that to note I could theoretically do it all as one fillet command, although from a design intent, I really want to think about those two things as separate entities. I have the fillet at the base here, that is one thing, and then the fillet on the corners. They may want to be modified separately, and so I'm going to keep those as separate commands so that I can in fact modify those individually. So next step, add a fillet. So I click the fillet button. I'm going to come in here with my mouse, click that point, and I need to click that point over here. And you can see through, you can kind of see it's like ghosting those lines for me. I can see it and click, or if you're more comfortable, if you hold down Shift and your scroll wheel, you can rotate around, click that point, and you can grab and drag this to 20. You can type in 20, whatever's more feels better for you is fine. Sometimes it's hard, you know, if it's 22, you're not going to nail it. So it would be easier to go in here and type 22. All right, so I click 20 for that, and that locks that in place. Next thing I'm going to do is deal with these four corners. So that's yet another fillet. So I invoke the fillet command, click this point, and that point, and that point, and that point, and these are also 20, and I can click OK. So that locks in all of those guys. So now that we have that, the next step is to put the top recessed hole, we call that a counter bore. We're going to put the counter bore here. Whoops. Oh yeah, let's go ahead and move forward here. And there it is. And I had mentioned that this guy has a relationship to this curve. The center point of this circle is coincident with the center point of this radius. So rather than having dimensions there, they share the same center point. That's why I had to do this radius first. So we're going to come back over here, and I'm going to go to my home command just so I can see what I'm doing. Create a new sketch, choose this top surface, invoke the circle command, and what you'll do is if I hover over here for a second and I start to pull away, when you get close, it's going to lock you to the center point, right? So you see that little blue circle show up. I click there, pull away, and create a dimension. So again, I'm going to hit this, or I can just type D. It's going to switch to dimension. I can give this a dimension here. And that outer hole has a dimension of 25 millimeters, diameter of 25. And that's it. Finish the sketch. Extrude. Click on that. I'm going to move into the surface. I want to move down 5 units, so -5. And that's it. That gives me that recess. Now, here's the thing. So this exercise is really about efficiency. I only did this once, right? Now I'm going to have a hole that I want to go all the way through this. So I'm going to do that next. Now I know that there's 4 of these. So there's this guy, and then there's one here, and there's one here, and there's one here. I don't want to do that 4 times because I have to then dimension 4 things, all of those other components. It's going to be much easier for me to create one feature and then mirror that feature, and then that will give me 2, and then I'll mirror it again when I mirror everything to the other side. So create a new sketch on that bottom part of that circle. There we go. Circle. This one's really easy. If I hover over this outside circle, it gives me that center point again. They share that center, pull away, give myself a type D for dimension, click the inside of that circle. That has a diameter of 10. That gives me a fully defined sketch. Finish the sketch. Yay. I'm gonna orbit around just a little bit more so I can see this. Extrude. Select that center hole, grab that and pull down. Now remember from our previous tutorial, I could go -40, sure. I could also go -10. No, actually I could go -5 because this total thickness is 10 and this is down 5, so really only have to go 5. But remember, design intent is for that to be a hole. And so independent of how thick this plate is, I want that to always go all the way through. So once I set this, it's moved to cut, I'm going to go up here to extent and change it from distance to all. That's going to make sure that that goes through all the way through the surface. Click OK. Now we have that hole. Okay, next step, now that we have that, is to create this object on both sides. So I want to mirror that from here to here, which means I need a plane that bisects the object in this direction, right? And it would be parallel. If I bring it up here, let's turn these on for a second. It's going to be parallel to my YZ plane, but it's in the middle of this object. Rather than like come up with math and figure out how far that offset is, Fusion has a very easy tool for us to use. It's called the mid-plane tool. I'm going to turn those guys off for a second. There we go. All right, so I'm going to come up here to my construct geometry. This is offset plane, so this would work. You could do the math and be like, all right, if I start with my YZ plane here, this is 200, that's on the plane on that edge, so I could offset a plane 100 millimeters, and that would create that, that plane in the middle. The problem with that is if you change the plate length here to 215 millimeters, it's no longer going to be in the middle, and that will throw everything off. So what I want to do is I want to create a plane that is locked to the geometry that I've already drawn, and I want it to be in the middle so that these guys are always mirrored about that middle axis. So the way I do that is come up here to my construct line, click mid-plane, and it's asking me to select planes. I need 2 of these to create a mid-plane, so I'm going to orbit around here. I'm going to select this surface here, hold down shift, orbit around here, select this surface here, and you'll see it drops that plane in the middle. Perfect, that's exactly where I want it. I click OK. Now what I can do is, I'm going to turn off, there we go, so I don't see those planes. It is leaving me that plane to look at. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mirror these 2 features about this plane, so that'll throw that hole over there. So I go to my create menu, I go to mirror, right? Now, over here it says pattern type. For you, it probably defaulted to faces if this is the first time you're using the command. I don't want to mirror just faces. I want to actually mirror the whole feature, which is the actual cut that goes through the object. So I now want to go to features. So make sure pattern type is features. It's asked me to select the object. So the objects I want to select are this hole that goes all the way through and this recessed face. So there's two things, right? And it's saying there's two objects selected. Now it asks for the mirror plane. So I click where it says select and highlight that blue. Click on the mirror plane. It's giving me kind of like a phantom view of what this thing looks like. Don't worry about compute option. Adjust is fine. And click OK. And you'll see now what it's done is it's created an exact mirror duplicate. The cool thing of this is I can go into the sketch for either of these items. I can change dimensions and this one will follow it, right? So it's a very, very helpful tool if later on you decide, oh, you know, I don't want a 10mm hole because I need a slightly larger bolt. This needs to be a 12mm hole. Well, you can go ahead and update that. And it's very easy to do that because now I just go back to the sketch that defines that hole right down here. Okay, so now that we have those guys, I'm gonna mirror this feature and these two holes about a mirror plane that bisects the object this way. So we've done this already. I'm gonna go in here now, turn this guy off. So those mirrors, because it's construction geometry, they show up under this construction folder. I'm gonna expand that and turn that off because I don't wanna see that anymore. And then we're going to go ahead and grab the plane, or create the plane rather, that goes in between this. So go back to construct, go back to midplane, choose this face here, and I'm going to hold down shift, use my scroll wheel, click this face here. You'll see it now creates a plane that bisects the geometry right down the middle, exactly what I want. Two planes are selected, click OK. And now we are going to go ahead and mirror all of this geometry all in one step. Again, the whole point here is efficiency. Let's not do things multiple times. So go to create, go to mirror, pattern type is features. It's asking me to select the features. So we want to be really careful here. We only get the ones we want. So I want that hole. I want this counterbore. Let's zoom in here. I want this hole. Did I get the whole thing? All right, I did. Oh yes, because that is mirrored, so that's why it's only showing up as one thing. And I want you, and I want you, and I also want, oh, and that grabbed both of those because they were all part of one feature. Okay, so we got those 5 things. So let's count them 1, 2, because we have the counterbore and the hole. This whole feature is mirrored off of these two. So this is actually one feature, even though it's made up of those two entities. So that's 1, 2, 3. 4 is this face, and 5 are these two fillets. Again, those fillets were done as one feature, so it selects both of them. Once I have that, I click under mirror plane, select, choose that mirror that I just created, that plane that I just created rather, and click OK. And lo and behold, we have both the holes and that face featured. Again, the lovely thing here, I can go back to any of these sketches, modify any of that geometry, and it will update for all of those holes or all of those faces. So it creates an efficiency both as we're drawing and later if we need to do any modifications. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do to this is we're going to emboss our name or the name of the part into the top surface of this. This is a good skill to know and to have. If you're sending stuff to the 3D printers, it allows you to differentiate your parts from other parts. Make sure that you know which part is which. So we're going to do that as our last step. So before we go too much further, this plane is annoying me, so I'm going to go into the construction and turn it off so I don't have to see it. And we're going to go ahead and start to put our name on this. So just like everything else, this starts with a sketch. So I use the Create Sketch button. I'm going to choose this top surface. Probably if this was actually a part I was making for somebody, I would stick it on the bottom here of the part. But we're going to stick it on the top. And under the Create menu, we're going to go to the text. I'm going to give it a point to insert the text in the text box. I'm going to type my name here. And I can change the height of this. Let's make this 15 millimeters tall. Let's make it bold. You can obviously change the font, so you can work through all of these different things if you want to. That's maybe a little bit fat, so let's make that a little bit skinnier. Okay, that looks fine. You'll notice that my text is upside down and it's going off my part. So first I'm going to rotate it around so it's right side up. So if I hover over this, it gives me this little control arm that I can swing around. I'm going to swing that around 90 degrees. And then if I move my cursor to the middle of that, it allows me to reposition this inside the volume of my part. You could certainly set up some construction lines. In this case, I just want to kind of visually set it in the middle. Once I'm happy with that, I click OK. That locks my text. And then I'm going to click Finish Sketch, like we always do. And lo and behold, we have my text right on there. Go back to my home view so I can see what's going on. We're going to extrude this. Imagine that. Select my name. I'm going to pull the arrow down so it moves to the cut operation. And we certainly don't want to go all the way through the material. Probably a ½ millimeter down is fine, but we'll actually just select -1 and click OK. And lo and behold, it actually cuts that text right into the part. And there it is. So that finalizes this exercise. I hope there was some useful stuff in there. The assignment that will be given will be something similar to this. So that's why I wanted to go through all of these different steps. Yeah, so hopefully that was helpful. I will catch you in the next lesson. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.